Gamers and this industry have always had a target on its back because there are tons of people out there who just view video games as a children's hobby, or that it can corrupt our minds and it can expose us to violence, and that can translate to something in the real world, which is absolutely ridiculous. But of course, ever since Gamergate 1, there have been tons of activists within this industry trying their best to make a quick buck, and the mainstream media has oftentimes smeared us and smeared the games we love to try to get their point across so they can appear to have more knowledge on this industry so they can continue to make money. And now we're finding out that Politico took $8 million in USAID taxpayer money while attacking Gamergate and pushing anti-gamer narratives. But before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, the media that exists now within the industry, like Kotaku, Polygon, The Gamer, they always wonder why we do not trust them, and we constantly say it's because you guys are being paid off, and they say, oh no, we're not. But now we're finding out that even Politico, the left-leaning news outlet that was smearing gamers during Gamergate 1 a decade ago in the gaming community, was receiving millions of dollars in taxpayer money. Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt announced Wednesday that the outlet will no longer receive federal funding after revelations that it took more than $8 million through USAID and other government contracts. So this funding bombshell was highlighted by an ex-user who pointed out that Politico has published multiple articles related to Gamergate, consistently framing it as a disinformation and harassment campaign while pushing narratives about diversity in gaming. Now, I have to say this all of the time. Gamergate 1 was not about harassing women or minorities or individuals in this industry. It was about ethics in journalism. And now, of course, with Gamergate 2 being well underway, we have those same worries. We cannot trust the media in the way that they cover video games. Oftentimes, they trash video games for not pushing the narratives that they want, and then they highlight and praise the ones that do. Look at something like Black Myth Wukong. They tried their best to smear that game and to get Game Science canceled, but it didn't work because it was a fantastic experience, but it didn't have enough diversity for them, so they constantly tried to trash it and even go after the developers and try to get the studio shut down. But then on the flip side, they will praise something like Dragon Age the Veilguard and EA and BioWare because it pushes modern day terminology like transgender and non-binary, because you have top surgery scar toggles, because there are forced narratives within these pieces of content where you have to acknowledge people's gender identities, which is all complete and utter BS. And gamers just want to be entertained. We want to buy entertainment, not propaganda, but that is a big problem in the industry right now. And even a decade ago, Politico was talking about Gamergate and how it was a harassment campaign, when again, it was not. And even there are 22 different articles talking about Gamergate on their site. Here are just a few from over, of course, the past decade. Nixon's back again and again and again, talking about Bridgegate and Pizzagate and Gamergate. Biden's invisible debt forgiveness policy. We previously saw a kind of misogyny during such moments as Gamergate. It seems that that is actually a line that they've ran with several times, because this exact wording is used in multiple articles, which is very bizarre. Lazy, I think, is probably the better word. According to his blog posts, the online harassment campaign known as Gamergate, which began in 2014 as a backlash against female critics of the gaming industry and included misogynistic attacks and death threats, Gamergate 1 was about ethics in journalism. Yes, there were women that were part of Gamergate 1. You cannot go around and say it's always sexist or misogynist attacks just because a woman happens to be part of the discussion. That is absolutely fucking insane. It's like with Disney shows and movies, for example. They've added more people of color. They've added more women. They've added more disabled folk in their pieces of content. So does that mean that every single time I criticize one of these, I'm either a racist or a bigot or a sexist, I'm ableist? Absolutely not. If you add more of these people, or there's more of these types of people in a conversation, then there's bound to be some backlash that happens to be levied towards their arguments. And that does not mean you can cry some sexism or racism or homophobia or something like that. And of course, they're going to try to always do that because they don't actually want to have to argue their points. And this is such a pathetic situation. I can't say I'm surprised, but I can say that I'm really fucking disappointed because we have heard for so long that, oh no, you can trust the media. The media would never just blindly smear gamers. Yes, they would. Even the gaming journos will do that. This is why you cannot trust outlets like this. And for years, of course, they have aligned themselves with activist gaming journalists who push woke narratives under the guise of combating toxicity. Their extensive coverage of Gamergate framed gamers as reactionary extremists rather than addressing the legitimate concerns about media corruption that sparked the controversy in the first place. Many of these narratives were driven by the same journalists who sought to rebrand gaming as a progressive battleground rather than an entertainment industry, and Politico's financial ties to the government now raise concerns about whether these narratives were shaped, at least in part, by taxpayer-funded incentives. Politico, of course, isn't alone in taking taxpayer money. According to USAspending.gov, other media outlets received it as well, like the AP, Reuters, and the New York Times. And remember, last year, the New York Times was running this major campaign for Ubisoft, talking about how we were just being racist, and that's why we're not happy with Assassin's Creed Shadows. These developers ran to the New York Times to put out this big string of hit pieces. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's where some of that money went. But we've talked a lot over just the past year about government funding in video games, because in the wake of Red Thread Games releasing Dustborn, it was revealed the developer had actually received funding from the European Union as well as the Norwegian Film Institute. Now it's being reported that the US government spent over $250,000 on a, quote, counter disinformation game. Absolutely mind-boggling. They want to convince people that video games are bad. They want to convince people that gamers are extremist reactionaries, and none of this is going to work out for them. Video games are a very positive factor in so many people's lives. They help with the development of young minds. They do help with focus. They do help with attention spans. They help with even things like depression and anxiety, because you get a sense of achievement if you do complete something in a video game. If you happen to, I don't know, get married or get a horse or save a castle and save the day. These are things that do affect people's lives in a positive fashion. But there are so many individuals out there who do not understand video games, and so they just constantly want to say that they are bad and they are a form of evil, which is absolutely fucking lunacy. And as a gamer, this is an extremely worrying situation to see happening, because these cultural Marxists have been trying to convince us for years that we are a problem, that gamers are toxic, they are hateful, they are bigots, but yet they, on the flip side, are doing their best to smear us and our industry because they want to push a narrative. This is a major problem, and this is why I will continue to call out situations like this on the channel. And to top all of this off, while we know that Dustborn received funding from the EU, the US government has spent over $250,000 on this counter disinformation game, and also that Politico had received funding, and they are known for smearing gamers, we have to sit here and wonder who else was getting money to smear gamers, who else was getting money, and we don't even know about it. It's a very worrying situation all around. Stuttering Craig, who owns and hosts Side Scrollers podcast, shared that the United States government had funded a counter-disinformation game to the tune of $275,000 back in 2021. He wrote, "Everyone is laughing at Norway and the EU for funding Dustborn, but a quick search shows the US also provided $275,000 of funding for a new counter-disinformation game." And it really wasn't even a game, it was just propaganda. That's all that it was at the end of the day. With the toolkit that was released in October of 2022, it stated, "In a study conducted by the University of Cambridge, people who play Harmony Square find misinformation significantly less reliable after playing, are significantly more confident in their assessment, and are significantly less likely to report sharing misinformation misinformation, and it's unclear how the State Department defines misinformation, but they still put this out with absolutely no problem. And when this happened, the Foundation for Freedom Online heavily criticized the game and the initiative in general, describing it as behavioral modification propaganda games intended to make young people around the world view populist content online as being de facto disinformation. It is almost as if the government is using the video game of Cat Park to get young people to subliminally believe that opposing the government is only done by disinformation purveyors. How convenient for the government that this government-funded game has such a plot. So this is not the first time that we've heard about something like this, and it will not be the last, but it is extremely disappointing and, of course, extremely worrying. I will be keeping my eye on this to see if any other information is released, but now that the Trump admin is cutting outlets off, we're finding out that, of course, Politico actually had taken in $8 million in USAID taxpayer money while attacking Gamergate and pushing anti-gamer rhetoric. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.